Joe Green has, as most of us do, sort of three strands to his life. There's the professional Joe Green, there's the member of church Joe Green, and there's the human being Joe Green. Joe was a teacher, joined the police in the early 80s, started, as so many do, or did in those days, on the beat in Wellington. He's worked through all ranks in both administrative and operational roles, and currently has the rank of inspector. From 1998 to 2014, he managed arms control and vetting services right across this country. He's currently working in an emergency planning and management role at National Headquarters in Molesworth Street. He's been an advisor to arms control to 2 United Nations delegations, to the Australian government in the 27 review of its national firearms management system, and also advised the state of Victoria developing its firearms safety foundation. Joe is currently one of an international group advising the UN on the development of international standards for arms control. He is incidentally not packing heat this morning. In terms of church, he's been a parishioner here since the mid-90s. He's in his 4th year of formation in the Launch Out program and has just completed the diploma in pastoral leadership. And in his human life, he's married to Anne. They have 3 children who are now aged in their early 30s. They have 9 grandchildren ranging in age from 7 months to 16 years. Gentlemen, would you please welcome Joe. Thank you, Justin.
I need to come to the door.
Just begin by saying, Whare Tu Nei, this building which houses us on a regular basis, Tēnā koe. Pa Michael, me pa Brian Hawkey, Tēnā kōrero. Ina ka mātua o tēnei rohi, that's all you old fellas. Tēnā koutou. Ina mate, to our dead, our communion of saints. Haere, haere, haere. Kāti rā, enough of that. Ki ngā hunga ora, to those of us who are alive. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. So yeah, we're going to sing again later on. And Kaumata, I was talking to a Kaumata, I'd lead a group of 2, me and a cop from Taniatua of the Ruatoki Marae. And I just said, I'm always conscious that my voice, I don't have a singing voice. And Sister Mari Gore, when I was in Newtown, tried to teach me to sing and ended up in hospital with it. But with hearing aids, of course, I don't hear properly, so it's impossible. And the Kaumata said to me, and I say this to our young people in our camps, God gave you the voice you have, He deserves to listen to it. Maybe we'll give it a bit of gusto. So it's really good to have the opportunity to be here, and I'm really nervous. And I was talking to Roland, and he said to me, well, we are on your side, you know. But I was also mindful that as a young fella, my grandmother considered that I'd been inoculated with a gramophone needle. And my wife reminded me that the only time she's seen me short of words was when I organised a 2-week total immersion Māori event on Marae in 1995, which was Māori Language Year. And we had all the Māori staff from the Central Region come to the Marae for 2 weeks, and the region commander said, I'll release the staff, but I don't have the money to pay for the event. So I have a little bit of a knack of finding money around the place, and I went and spoke to a trust in Dunedin, and they stumped up the 16,000 we need. At the end of the event, we had a feast and then some skits and some drama, and they presented me with a greenstone pendant, and in way of thanks for the work I'd done. My wife said my mouth was just sort of like if nothing was coming out. They left me another gift as well though. I had a car issued to me at that stage because I was the region coordinator for training and for youth education across the whole of the central North Island, and they borrowed it's a station wagon, they borrowed the car to go to Masterton to pick up some crayfish for the feast. It took about 6 months for the smell to get out of it. So who am I? A bit about me. Sir David said he came from Mākuri, and I went to Mākuri over January, and there's a bank at Mākuri at one stage, and a shop. Well, I spent my formative years at a place called Kamako, Google it. Doesn't have a bank, it had a church and a school of about 25 of us. And it's on the banks of the Pohongina River. So if I were Māori, and I'm not, and I were to identify with the river, it would be the Pohongina River. So I grew up swimming in the lower reaches of the Wanganui River, the Pohongina River, and have spent some great time hunting in the headwaters where it pops out of a hillside of Pohongina Saddle just as a very small little creek. So wonderful place. Then started school at Camarco, and then when I was about 12 or 13 my parents shifted to Ashurst, which is at the mouth of the Manawatu Gorge. So I went to school from there. But a bit about my whakapapa. So the Green family arrived in New Zealand in 1839 when William Green swam some cattle ashore at a place now called Green Point in Akaroa. And I have a photo of myself, we are immortalised there, photo of myself standing next to the sign telling people that this is the Green Point sewage plant. So when I've spoken to people in Canterbury, I tell them that before your 5 ships, we were Cantabrians. They don't kind of like it. Another interesting thing about that patch of land is that William Green was the one at Britomar Point raised the British flag as the French sailed up Akaroa Harbour. And in 2006 I organised and facilitated an international fire and safety seminar, and we handed the car with the protocol of the seminar over to Ngāi Tahu. And on the opening night I was talking to an elderly woman who also came from that same patch of land, and her story was that on a flat piece of land just above Britomar Point, Te Rapraha invited her tribe to a feast. I think it was called the Feast of the Field of Pumpkins, and killed virtually everybody there. They don't like Te Rapraha's haka in the South Island, for some good reasons. The Clymo family, my grandmother's side, my father's mother's side, arrived in New Zealand on the William Bryan in 1841. It was the first ship to land at Plymouth, at New Plymouth, sailing out of Plymouth. And in a couple of weeks' time I'm going back to Cornwall just to have a look at the sort of area that they came from. Then we head into the 1870s when Julius Vogel was recruiting people from overseas to build the population of New Zealand, and we had the O'Briens from Ireland, the Buckleys from Ireland, the family, the Kamowskis from Eastern Prussia, verging on the edge of Poland. So when people ask my ethnicity, I tell them that's a little bit of the best dog in the street, every best dog in the street. Mongrels, basically, which most New Zealanders are. But it was really interesting, the status of being an O'Brien. I didn't think it was had any particular status, but when I was in the seminary, I did 3.5 years at the seminary, the sisters, the Clooney sisters at Mosgiel, were Irish Clooney. When they found out I was an O'Brien, that really meant something. It meant they could tell me off. One of them pulled my ear at one stage. But at that stage in the 70s, seminarians weren't allowed to have cars. And I had access to a little 100E that normally had 4 nuns sitting in it, so it was quite good to have that level of status. Joy Cowley led our Launch Out retreat last year, and she asked us to think back to our very first memories of church, of going to church. And I thought back, and my memory, Camarco is about probably a 30-40 minute drive from Ashurst. So our Catholic church was a chapel of ease in Ashurst. Now Bishop Cullinane's private chapel almost, he says mass there most days. And we drive there. I always remember women in those days, I suppose it would have been about 1960 or something like that, when I was 5 or 6, always wore a hat to church. And like my first memories of church is my mother reaching into the glove box and pulling out this little feathered hat about that big and putting it on as we drove down the valley to Mass. I sort of found that kind of an interesting thing to remember. The church we went to in Ashurst, St Columba's, was built obviously by donations, and my grandfather was one of the people who helped build the church. Very strong sense of ownership of the church, and a couple of times we tried to produce masses and so on there, and it hasn't generally worked. But as I say, Bishop Cullinane's there now. So Catholic upbringing, I went to state schools. I sometimes feel kind of lucky to have gone to state schools. And the nearest I came to a Catholic school, went to Palmerston North Boys High School, secondary school. The nearest school that had any girls at it was St Joseph's Mercy School, Mercy Convent School. So that's the nearest I ever got to a Catholic school growing up. But I was really lucky in growing up that I only had one parish priest for the whole of the time, from the time that I was born basically till the time that till I left home at the age of 17 or 18. And that was Father John Summers. And he was curate sitting over there. He used to serve Mass for Father Brian when he'd be rushing down the road at Ashes to serve Mass.
That's right.
Now, John Summers was, he was a giant of a man, tall. Does anybody here know him? Knew him? Yep. And I think that there's two things that really stand out for me. The parish weren't donating enough money to keep the priest. And he had a conversation with the parish about he was looking for a job, and he had a job lined up as the porter at the hospital, which was just across the road from the presbytery. And the parish realised that, and he made it clear that if he got a paying job, that he would not be available to the parish for the hours that he was employed. And so the parish dug deep and paid up the ante with the donations. I hope we never get to that point. And the other thing was, other things really. He had a complaint from a parishioner that he wasn't visiting, wasn't doing enough visitation, hadn't been to visit them at their house, and his response was, "Aren't you lucky? Because the houses are people need a priest." But a very practical man. When my father left my mother with three young kids, one of the first people across the doorstep was Father John Summers with a box of groceries. So that's the sort of practical level. I left home at 17 or 18 to go to the seminary. Father Tom Duffy was the person, I think he's meant to be vocations director, but that's it. So I went there, went first of all to Holy Name Seminary and did 2 years there in philosophy under the Jesuits. And there met some great people like Father Bernard O'Brien SJ, a New Zealand Jesuit. And you learn to read, proclaim the gospel properly when Father Bernard O'Brien is standing at the back of the chapel and you're up the front, and he certainly made himself heard and understood. Then I went to Mosgiel for a year, and I didn't particularly enjoy Dunedin. I enjoy Dunedin far more now than I did then. And so I spoke to the bishop, it was Bishop Snedden at that time, and asked if I could have a placement outside of the seminary, have a parish placement. And he sent me into St Anne's Parish, Newtown, where Father Bernie Miles was the parish priest, and there was Father Fergus Reeves and Father John Julian. So I lasted 5 months, but it was a time of great formation. So I had 2 days a week at St Anne's School with the Mercy Sisters. Mari Gore was my mentor there. Then I had 2 days a week with the Maris Brothers at Tasman Street, and I had time at Calvary Hospital. Before it was a hospice, Sister Margaret Lancaster was my spiritual director, and I had 2 people. One was a chap who was dying that I was working with, and one was a guy who had severe, I think, multiple sclerosis. So I turned up to visit him one day, and he had these little white threads sitting on his bedside table. What's this? And he was pulling the tendons out of his feet through an ulcer in the bottom of his foot, but he couldn't feel it. So a lot of learning there. One of the fondest memories is for the school holidays. In those days, we used to, 3 terms a year. 3 students from Loreto Hall, the Catholic Teachers College, were placed in the parish. They were working in the schools on their placement. And one of them is now my wife, but we didn't, that was a later event. But we were given the job of the Easter ceremonies, organised the Easter liturgy. So the 4 of us set about organising the Easter liturgy. And if anybody, and I know some people here have organised the Easter liturgies, it was midnight mass, and it was a big job, big job. So we went out for a few drinks afterwards, and me and these 3 girls got back to the presbytery about 3 in the morning, and I didn't have my key, And if anybody remembers St Anne's Presbytery, had a fire escape going up the side, which was my bedroom, was above the front door. I'm standing there with these three girls, a little bit pissy-eyed, figuring out how I was going to climb up the fire escape to get back into my room. And then Bernie Miles opened the front door, been called out. He said, you might as well use the front door like the rest of us. So Julie go to bed. A couple of hours later, about 5:30 in the morning, my bedroom was above the front door. I heard tink, tink, tink. Pulled back the curtains. There's Monsignor Bill Heavey standing there. He was in worse condition than I was. And he decided that he would crash at the presbytery rather than try and get home to where he actually lived. So I didn't feel so bad. I thought maybe I was on the right track. One of the things that I met my in-laws before I met my wife, which was kind of useful. In fact, I'd spent a couple of nights sleeping on their couch before Anne even turned up. And so Bernie Miles said to me right at the outset, when you're doing visitation, the drink's tea. Right? The drink's tea. Because large Polish community, large Dutch community at that time in Newtown, they'll be offering you vodka and gin. So Bowles Gin has a bite, I can tell you. So a few nights, dinner at the in-laws, what became my in-laws, crash on their couch for the night, get up in the morning, go back home. I worked at the freezer works in the holidays while I was at the seminary. So seminarians now get paid an allowance, but in those days we didn't. So the church was paying for my living, my food and accommodation, and I had to go and work to raise my spending money during the year. And so I worked at the Borthwick's freezing works in Fielding, and I motorbike over there from Ashurst where my parents lived, and usually go to Mass with the Dominican sisters at the school for the deaf, St Dominic's School for the Deaf. So catch an early morning Mass, head off to work. And in the 3 or 4 years that I was there, which I thoroughly loved the work, supervised by a chap called Pat, I just remember him, big, solidly built Irishman in his early 70s. And he came back to work, I talked to him, chatted to him, good Catholic man, came back to work for about 3 or 4 months of the year. He said it got him out of the house, gave a bit of space between him and mum, and it gave him a bit of pocket money during the year. He was brought back specially to manage the students. So his introduction was, see this? Any problems? We'll be sorting it out. He never had any problems. The other person that I met while I was there was Charles Cooper. Father Charles Cooper was based at Fielding then. And as part of the course that I've just done, I had the pleasure of interviewing Charles Cooper about 2 months ago on what it means to be a priest in sacramental ministry. And spent an hour and a half chatting about old times and about what it's like to be in sacramental ministry. Because as our priest numbers reduce, that's the role that the priest is more likely to be taking up. And he described the absolute joy of having the time to actually sit down and pray and write a sermon the way that Pope Francis talks about in Evangelii Gaudium. And then actually being able to focus the sermon to the people that it's addressed to, and to actually talk about praying it. He also talked about the sadness of leaving a parish, that when a priest has been in a parish for 6 or 7 or 8 years, it actually almost physically hurts to leave. So I said to him, how does a priest learn about what you've just told me about how nice it is to be in sacramental ministry? There is no mechanism for priests to share on that sort of level. He said, I suppose I should go to deanery meetings more, but I find them boring. So I'm just that little challenge probably. 6 months at St Anne's, and I decided it was time to go. Applied to leave, left the seminary, left training for priesthood. Didn't know whether I was meant to be in a religious community or whether I was meant to be in married life. And a friend from Christchurch visited me a few weeks later, and the answer became abundantly clear, not called to celibacy. I went teaching. So I did teaching for 3.5 years. Went to Teachers College as an adult student. Did 1 year at Brooklyn Primary School, and then went to St Madeleine Sophie, which was attached to Erskine and Island Bay, now called St Francis de Sales School. And by that stage, Anne had come back from Auckland, and was there's a big flat of us in Mount Victoria, 7 of us, and she was teaching at St Madeleine Sophie's as well. And things move on, we ended up getting married and so on. three kids later, and away you go. So, just about, we got married in 1979. We bought a house earlier in the year, borrowed $1,000 off the mother-in-law, and bought the house, moved into it before we were married. And back then, of course, that had to be done in secret, because Anne would have got fired from her teaching position at a Catholic school, and I found out that we were living together before we were married. But we regularised things. Senior David Price was the celebrant who married us. I was Anne's parents' only daughter. They had this idea of what they wanted for a wedding, to see her married, and they were offering to pay, so it was all good. But I'll never forget standing at St Anne's Church and turning around and seeing my wife coming in under the archway. Just absolutely stunning, and it's still in my mind there. Just think back to it. Yeah. So, good Catholics, natural family planning, come home from a Christmas party, son on the way. So Daniel was born in 1980, and we decided once we started to have a family we would carry on. And Rebecca in 1982, and then Jessica in 1983. And Jessica was born on Friday the 7th of October. On Monday the 10th of October, I was sworn in as a constable and went to the police college for 5 months. Came home every now and the weekends. I lived with it ever since. Leaving home 3 days after the youngest was born. But when I look back on the photos, on a more serious note, the family photos from that time, I just realised my wife was so drawn looking, and I realised just how hard she actually worked over that 5 months keeping a household together. Had to leave teaching in one of the last 4 Catholic schools to be integrated, in a 2-year appointment with a government policy that the only new positions for teachers were those who were coming out of the Teachers College because they had too many teachers. Catholic education weren't going to make the position permanent because they were lining up for integration. I was working 3 or 4 days, nights a week at a bread factory as well as teaching, and so I sat down to get another job. I put the dollar figure at the top. I can remember it was $21,000 because I was getting paid $16,000 as a teacher, and I was earning the 5 at the bread factory. Put down the characteristics of the job I wanted to have, and policing popped out. So there's no sort of grand mission in life or anything. So I started off in the beat in Wellington, as Justin pointed out, and came out of the police college. One of the first, I was the second oldest person in the recruit wing, and the second fittest. The fittest person was Rewy Williams. He's a bodybuilder who'd been working on the rigs up in the Indian Ocean somewhere. There's only 3 things to do on rigs: work, eat, or 4 things. Watch porn or go to a gym. And he wasn't interested in the porn, so he spent a lot of time at the gym. He was a very big, muscly guy. Started off on the beat in Wellington, and one of the first jobs was trades hall bombing. So as a scene guard, because you didn't do anything great and fancy after coming just out of the college. So the bomb goes off. I'm dispatched down to Trades Hall. I'm given a hot spot to stand to make sure the scene is secure. Tucked in behind a door. There's broken glass everywhere. I couldn't see anything. I was just basically behind the door, make sure no one comes through that door. If they do, stop them. Went off on my lunch break, came back. Senior Constable Arnie Ledbetter from Newtown had been doing scene guard. Stands there, kicked all the glass out of the way. Stood there so he could look straight down on Ernie Abbott. So I thought, well, good enough for the senior constable, good enough for me. So I ended up spending most of the shift watching the forensic work done around Ernie Abbott's body, which was pretty informative. I was there on the last night. We had a caravan outside. So I was there on the last night, and we went in, the detectives came out and said, the place is clean, you can do what you like now. So we went in there and it was clean. All the broken glass gone, all the doors gone, everything cleaned out of the place, it was spotless. And those exhibits are still retained for the day that we perhaps find someone who set the bomb. I was thinking about the nature of policing. So I started off on the beat. I didn't walk the beat long because of the 4 people who went on section. I was the most senior. But sociologists, and I've got an honours degree in sociology, they identify two groups of people, of which police officers are one of them, but the night workers and death workers. So at night, the community is quite different. And those of us who are working, we're talking about cleaners, bots, prostitutes, rags, strippers, and back then transvestites, wide range of people, and you learn to be able to speak with them because they are information about what's happening. Not for too long for some of them because you interfere with business, but and you develop a particular viewpoint about the sort of people who avail themselves of the services of some of those people. Back then, police officers wore dark navy blue, no high vis. And you could basically step back into a doorway and just disappear and just stand and watch the world go by. Well, what we used to do was down Taranaki Street with the car yards, just test the doors of cars. There's always one unlocked, jump in the car and just sit there and watch what people are doing out on the street. It's very, very interesting. You never lose the ability to speak with those groups of people. And reading the biography of Pope Francis, they are the people that he left his presbytery to go and speak with and spend time with. And his biographer describes him sitting on park benches, hearing confession of exactly those sorts of people, the cleaners, the prostitutes, the rags, the strippers, the transvestites. I don't know whether any cops would have got that. And when I went back to Wellington in 1996 as a shift senior sergeant, they don't do beat work like that anymore, certainly in Wellington. And I took a couple of young cops out on the beat just so that they could experience what it's like to actually walk around and actually speak with people. The other aspect is death worker. So police officers deal with sudden deaths. They deal with about 5,000 or 6,000 of the 28,000 or 30,000 deaths a year in New Zealand. And the most challenging part, apart from bodies being in different states of composition and so on, is I found informing jobs the most challenging. So that informing job is where there's been a death and you have to go and tell the family. And one that always sticks in my mind is there was an air crash in Marlborough about 1985. 5 or 6 people in one family killed. Just making sure no one here was in that family. I knew that family. And so we went out and you did? Yep. So going out, I had the job of speaking with two, I think probably the grandmother of the family, I think a Karori, and he was okay. She threw us out of the house, which was sort of an understandable reaction. And then we had to go out to Johnsonville on a weekend afternoon, and the rest of the family had the barbecue going ready for those people who were going to be arriving. So, yeah, that's the job that probably sticks in my mind. I think we did a good job. I was talking with Anne Powell during the week about the speech, and I think I remember reading, I did a diploma in police studies and just carried on to do a BA. But one writer talks about, to be a successful police officer, you have to develop compassion. If you don't have compassion and feeling for the people that you're working with, then you're not going to survive. But what comes with the compassion is a level of cynicism. So one of the first jobs I attended with a mate of mine who's now wears a different uniform, he's the Provost Marshal for the Armed Forces, is old man had died in the toilet. We had to pull the toilet door off and get him out of there. And the lady in the house made us a cup of tea with some scones while we were doing it, jam and cream and all the rest. And as we drove away, we're in the right job now. We could do with a few more of that. But that's the cynicism. So in terms of policing, I've got the time. So I went to from Wellington to Foxton. We wanted a change in view. You learn to be polite in country policing. If you're not polite, you're going to get beaten up. So the cop in Shannon put pressure on people. He had to shift. Things like you're under the car checking the VIN and the bonnet drops on you. Or you start going to bed with the pistol next to you. So my kids got used to seeing me, not because I was fearful or anything, because I actually got on really well with people. But if it required us to be armed, then I'd take the gun home, walk in for tea, put the pistol on top of the fridge, and sit down, actually pick it up, put it in the post on the way out. And then, of course, coming back to Wellington, been restructured 3 times, got a job at what's called the Licensing and Vetting Service Centre, in charge of arms control, trying to correct miscreants like myself. And it was a bug hole from restructuring, and ended up spending 16 years there and absolutely having a ball, meeting some absolutely fabulous people in both the firearms community and in the care community, which avail themselves of vetting services. While there, back in the early 2000s, coroners were writing to police and the Mountain Safety Council about deaths of hunters, and making all sorts of suggestions. And so we didn't really know, so I utilised the skills for an honours degree and did some research on the 33 deaths that had happened from 1979 to 2001, and just what actually did happen on the events. And the most common, it's like a song that goes through all the time. A couple of people go hunting, they separate, then they go to join up again, and one mistakes the other for an animal and shoots them. But the saddest one that is of a 15-year-old, so a group of 4 went into the bush, they separated, 2 went to the top of a gully and 2 to the bottom, and at the top of the gully, shot rings out, they're 90 metres apart, I couldn't see each other. A shot rings out and the 15-year-old drops dead next to what I eventually worked out was his grandfather. So, yeah. One of the things about deaths of hunters is that Māori are significantly underrepresented, and the only death where a deer was being carried on a person's back was where an uncle shot his nephew, but thought he was shooting a deer. So I wanted to find out about why that might be the case. So I went up to Tūhoe country, because one of the people I worked with gave me access to that. Interviewed a group of half a dozen hunters or so, spoke to the executive, got permission to do that, went out the back, had the notebook out, put the notebook away, just talked to people. And once the F's and the C's and the P's were flowing, I knew that I'd made a connection, and they told me about how Māori hunt differently. Just want to talk about being a Catholic, I guess. So Anne and I married in the Catholic Church, brought our kids up Catholic, all of that usual stuff. I found out if you take your kids to the church to do the cleaning on Saturday and let them run around, it's very hard to expect them to behave themselves on Sunday. It's impossible. We came here in 1996, and I would have thought I was just an occasional Catholic probably. But in 1999, at the age of 43, I went to Mass here. I think it was Easter. Went home, I went back to the in-laws, because my mother-in-law was with me. We went back to the in-laws, who were living here then. Father-in-law's a Dutchman, did I mention that? And so we're talking about Mass, and he got talking about the burglar at the wedding feast of Cana. I didn't know the Bible all that well then. I said, I don't think there is a burglar at the wedding feast of Cana. And is anybody aware of this? There was a burglar at the wedding feast of Cana. So I got the Bible out when I got home, and flicked through it. There is no burglar at the wedding feast of Cana. But almost by accident, I read the opening of Ephesians, and it was like a bolt from the blue. It was like someone had smacked me one. And it really was going to Mass every day, popping down the road from work to the cathedral, go to Mass, and sort of like during the consecration, it was like full on. And after about 3 or 4 weeks, I thought, well, you've got to rein this in, because you can't carry on like that. Maybe you can, but I thought I needed to do something. So I guess just really thought about it and moderated what I do. But I think I'm a pretty hard-out Catholic in that regard. And I think back to that experience when things aren't quite so cheerful. A part of my stuff with arms control, the international standards for arms control, Auntie Helen, UN, paid for me to go to Geneva for a 2-day meeting. And I decided I'd go a week early and go to Rome. So I had a week in Rome. And some interesting experiences there, apart from the woman in the coffee bar where I bought my coffee every day telling me that I was no longer having a long bout of black and I was a cappuccino sort of person. I prayed at the tombs of the popes. Europeans really like having their dead in glass boxes on display. I found that when I went to the Netherlands as well. And so I'm going around just generally praying at the tombs of the popes. Jess was pregnant at that time, my youngest daughter, and she was having difficulty with pregnancies. So I guess if all the candles I lit at statues of Our Lady in Rome were put together, it'd make the sack of Rome look pretty tiny. But I'm praying at the tombs of the popes, and I get to the tomb of Peter, which is the last one in the corridor that I was following. And I was all prayed out, just a blank mind. And I haven't shared this with many people. I was all prayed out, I was just staring at the tomb really, and found myself praying for Father Michael. So I don't know why I was praying for my parish priest in November 2010, but I found I was, and absolutely astounded me. I actually made a note in my travel diary about that. The other experience, I went to Pompeii, and on the way there met a man with a knife, and railway station at Naples. Saw this guy on the platform, thought he looked a bit dodgy, thought he looked like my younger brother-in-law actually, and he was dodgy. Offered me a pistol back in the 80s if I felt I ever needed a bit of protection, about $1,800. I only worth about $300 then. That's the black market. Then I went down the elevator to catch the train to Pompeii, the local train, and there he was again. And I got on the train and I sat up against the window, and he sits down next to me. And he's going like this. And I thought, that guy's got a knife. So I turned around and faced him. I thought I better have a plan here. So I turned around and faced him, looked at him, and had my fist resting on my knee like that. And the strategy was going to be, if he pulled the knife, I was just going to go whack. Once his nose was spread across his face, I'd sort out where to from there. Came to the station, he pulled the knife out of his thing, put it in his top pocket, and got off the train. And the woman sitting opposite me with the groceries everywhere was absolutely freaking. But little adventure. Then I went to Assisi, stuffed up my train bookings, or bought the ticket. Early in the morning, I got up about 5 or 6 in the morning, caught the train to Assisi, thought I was buying a return ticket, it wasn't. Absolutely astounding place, got to go to Assisi. And I made a note in my diary about the rock and iron of Assisi challenges the marble and gold of Rome. And I would suggest that when we listen to Francis, it still does. It still does. I bought some souvenirs from Assisi, my pagan son-in-law. I only had a small bag, so I just bought a small tea candle, little nativity set on the side of it, and I bought some lucky monks, which are these things they sell with statues of monks drinking and eating. And I could bring it back, brought one for each of the kids, gave it to Jess and Simon, and the son-in-law turns around and says, I knew he'd bring back some of that God stuff. So I've got about 7 more minutes, I just want to... Working with youth has been, I joined the parish council in 2004, and I was tasked with speaking with the Māori community here, and found out there is a whole community here who is working with lay leadership. And we were talking about it then, and we're frightened and nervous about it. But there is a whole community in the Catholic Church who's predominantly lay-led. And with young people, ended up on the Youth Trust and helping organise camps and so on, because in 2007 a 12-year-old niece came to live with us. She was taken from my sister by SIFs. So that's where parish really makes a difference. You know, this kid arrives, basically no clothes except what she's wearing. The Catholic school takes her in and offers that pastoral care, and the parents who just ring up and the school uniform appears, socks appear, all of that stuff just turns out. So you cannot express your thanks enough for parishioners who do that sort of thing. One of the camps we run is Who Moved the Goalposts, which is about it's about sex, relationships, God and you, basically. And I'll put some of the theology of Pope John Paul II down the back there, because we have those up around the brother's house for use. So we're talking about sex and relationships and how we get on, and the young fellas go away and they talk about strategies for behaving themselves. And one of them, I just thought I'd share this because I think it's a pretty cool quote. One of the groups came up with, sex is like a toaster. You don't use it in the bath. So tell me more about that. Well, what happens if you use a toaster in the bath? You're probably going to die, right? You get electrocuted. It's going to hurt. Sex is good with the right person, in the right place, in the right time. Outside of that, you've got problems. So I thought that was a pretty astute comment from a group of 13 to 15-year-old lads. One of the biggest influences in life has been Māori, and I mean, as a teacher, I taught what we call taha Māori. But I got really involved during the 1990s and into the 2000s with developing the Māori responsiveness strategy with police. And you can't do it half pie. You either go in or you don't, especially when you're invited in by people. Just a couple of things. In sociology, I read work by a chap called Paulo Freire. He's a sociologist and a humanist and an educationist. And one of his major works is The Pedagogy of the Oppressed, and another book called The Pedagogy of Hope. And he's got a whole lot leading to Christina, which will lead us to his sister. His contemporary is Gutierrez, who is a liberation theology person. They look pretty much the same. They were of an age, both from South America, both from that sort of background. And what Paulo Freire said is that only the oppressed can liberate themselves. Those of us who are not of the oppressed, all we do when we try to liberate the oppressed is oppress them more. But we do have a role. And our role is to stand next to the oppressed, alongside them, not take over. And in the words of Pope Francis, to take one's brother or sister by the hand and help him or her to walk. That was from the sermon on the 12th of March. To take one's brother or sister by the hand and help him or her to walk. And a phrase that stuck with me for 20 years since I heard it. Most Māori are really just wonderful, warm people. And there are some who play up. And I remember a woman saying, why all this effort? The good Māori put huge effort into reforming their community. And a woman said this, wash the dirt off and they're all whānau. So when I read Pope Francis, because I can't understand what he speaks, that's what I hear. Wash the dirt off and they're all whānau. And if we believe, as we proclaim, that we are brothers and sisters in Christ, it's a challenge to us, do we actually take our brother or our sister by the hand and help him or her to walk? There's some people in our community who are on the periphery and who are poor and who are hungry, who are druggies and drunkards and wastrels and all those words. Do we actually take them by the hand and help them to walk? The big event for me with Māori was in being invited to Maunga Pohatu in 2012. It was before the apology by the Commissioner for the 2007. So why was it significant? I'm a Pākehā, I'm a cop, and we'd been there 5 times since 1867, between 1867 and 2007. We shot a few, we raped some, and here they are inviting me back because I helped to develop a program to Whaka Tupatu. 50% of Tūhoe who use a firearm are not licensed, which means the firearms license, it means they haven't had safety training. And so this program is roaring through Tūhoe, and then last week, Tūwhati Toa said that they want the program in all 26 of the MRI. I went to Minganui. I drove through Minganui about 10 years ago after having spoken to a Maris brother who worked there. And it's a town that's now owned by Tūhoe. It's a former forestry town. It's rotting away. I drove through in a rental car, white guy in a rental car about 8 in the morning, and I could just feel the eagles, the eyes looking at me out the windows. I went back in 2012, accompanied some people. I met Rusty and Raywin, who's a social worker and community worker, and I had a cup of tea which was white with 2 sugars, and if you don't take sugar, don't stir it. That's how it comes. And I met some great people, and I met a community. We thought we were going there to talk to them about having a whakatūpato and sort of, but that was in November 2012. We thought maybe March 2013 or something like that. No, they were ready to go. They'd been round, handed out the arms code, how about next week? So, taking on the smell of the sheep, which Francis talks about, and you actually go and sit down with people, don't stir the tea, you don't take sugar, you actually get a different view. Just to conclude, I'm in launch out and I finished the diploma. This is my 4th year of formation. I thought I'd treat this like a job interview, but I'm not sure I have. So what happens this year is we have a retreat in June and then an endorsement committee meets, and the intention is if I meet the standard, I'll be endorsed. But just what is launch out? We have a reduction in the number of priests. We don't have a shortage of priests at all. If you compare the stats for the rest of the world, we just have a reduction in the number of priests. We don't have, as the Filipino, I've interviewed a Filipino, we don't have mass 8, 9, 10, and then again in the afternoon 2, 3, 4, with 2,000 people at each mass. That's in the town. If you're in the village, you get mass at Easter and on your feast day, village feast day. We don't have a shortage of priests. But nevertheless, Lumen Gentium, number 33, paragraph 33, and Canon Law 517, bracket 2, both provide for lay people. Lumen Gentium 33 talks about the apostolate of the laity, except where a bishop decides to invite a lay person to share in the apostolate of the ordained. Can't do what an ordained minister does, but we can work with them. And 517 talks about participate in the pastoral care of a parish. So 4 years formation, an 18-paper diploma, 4 pastoral experiences, 2 of them in this parish. Father Michael has been totally supportive. We had the liturgy, the work with Holy Communion, and then Eddie Doran and Margaret Bevan with the RCIA, and my 4th one has been working with the Wellington South RCIA team, and the Cardinal has invited me to be the go-to person for the RCIA in the diocese. Father Michael would have received a letter on Tuesday or Wednesday about that. So it's made up of this 4 pastoral experience, monthly spiritual direction, an annual weekend retreat, 3 prayer days annually at the beginning of the year, a barbecue. So that sort of, there's a group of about 16 to 20 people. I think there's 7 lay pastoral leaders working in the diocese. So the theme that I selected, just to conclude, was to ki te kei o te waka. And it's a proverb that was given to the Māori Responsiveness Strategy by Dr. Api Mahuika. And the full phrase is tu ki te kei o te waka, kia pākia koe I nanaru o te wā. We just shorten it down, tu ki te kei o te waka. Stand at the stern of the canoe and feel the spray of the future biting at your face. So I think as a parish we're at that point. Why stand in the stern? Because that's where the steersman is. And the steersman can't sit down. Has to always stand and see where the boat's going. Because a canoe without a rudder is just a big flash log. So on nice days when you're standing at the stern of the canoe, great, the sun's shining, it's on your face or on your back, sea's flat, fish are biting, wonderful world. Weather gets a bit shitty, you feel the bite of the spray of the future biting at your face. You've got to stand there and take it. Or if you prefer a Pākehā way of putting it, Peter Drucker said, leadership is a foul weather job. So we're heading into a time of huge change in our parish, and the challenge is this. Are we prepared to stand in the stern of the canoe and take what comes? Lord Reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou.
Questions for Joe?
No admissions of guilt will be forthcoming.
He hasn't got a notepad with him, he's not wired, so
Does your wife say to you, can't you settle on one job and all over the place?
Yeah, I've been lucky. I've got a wife that's totally supportive, 100%. And in a sense, we kind of have our own lives. But as part of that, as an example of the support, that last paper I did have to get a group of parishioners together to talk through some scenarios. The scenarios were about difficult pastoral situations between lay pastoral leaders and priests, and didn't have a venue. We don't have a meeting room in this parish. The physical space doesn't meet our pastoral needs. So my wife's a kindy teacher, and she came down and opened the kindy up, made the cups of tea, made sure people were comfortable. So then in the background there, yep, I think sometimes she's probably quite happy to
You're a good woman.
getting off doing that.
Are you carrying on as a policeman while you're doing your lay pastoral leadership?
Am I carrying on as a policeman? My aim is to, and I've told my boss this, my aim is to have left police within 12 months. I'm ready to call it retire, because I pick up a superannuation scheme, but it's not really retire.
Joe, what do you do in your spare time?
I play with my ring.
Joe, I've known several young policemen that I've met in my journey who have left the police force for one reason or another. What are the challenges to young people, especially if you have a faith and belief in certain?
Challenges being a police officer or young people generally?
Police officer.
Police officer. I think the biggest challenge for police is that New Zealand is increasingly multiracial, multi-ethnicity. And the biggest challenge is to learn to work with different ethnicities, and then as an organisation to recruit people who are of that ethnicity or speak the language of those ethnicities. That's the biggest challenges. I look at, when I look at and travel around the districts, at what young police staff, young meaning newly trained police staff do. They deal with far more difficult incidents than I would have dealt with as a constable. So they're dealing with, for example, multi-car crash 30 years ago. Traffic cops dealt with that. And they did the crash, we just picked up the body, took it off to the mortuary. Pretty simple really, hardly any paperwork even. But now constables go to a multi-car crash, they're doing the whole lot. Scene, evidence, and remembering now that after an incident down in Invercargill, Southland, we treat crashes as crime scenes. So it's much, much more complex. They are, I would say, more highly trained and more skilled than we were 30 years ago.
Right, I think the first thing is, and maybe I've said this before, but thank you so much for giving of yourself, Joe. It's what we ask our presenters to do, and you have done it, and you've challenged us. I mean, I just thought it was a fascinating address. He started off with his ancestors, which I thought was a very intriguing thing to do when you look back to see where they've all come from and how we are, as you say, sort of mongrels. And then we get the insights into Maori life. Interesting, I didn't realise that probably in our parish they're lay-led, and the life of policing, married life, and we've learned such a lot. And I've ended up with a whole heap of quotes. I thought the rock and iron challenging the marble and gold was actually absolutely fantastic. And I think, not quite sure for what reason, that sex is like a toaster. You don't use it in the bath. We'll all be warned at our age. Anyway, God bless. I could go on, I think, forever, because there's such a lot of things here that we could talk about. But thank you very much for coming, and we've had a marvellous turnout again, and thank you so much, Joe.
And as a word of advice before you go, before you criticise anybody, walk a mile in their shoes. Because then when you criticise them, they're a mile away and you've got their shoes. policeman. I'll tell you a story about someone else who's in the business of law enforcement. He was actually a customs and immigration border guard on the border between Mexico and the United States at Tijuana. And he was on duty one day, and this guy pedalled up on a bike from Mexico, and slung over his back he had these two quite large bags. So the guy pulled him over and said, "What's in the bags?" And the bloke said, "Sand." Okay, he said, "Well, we'll have to check that out." So they took the bags, they ripped them open, poured them on the desk, and sure enough, it was sand. But the guard's suspicion was well and truly up. He said, "Well, we're going to have to detain you overnight while we analyse this stuff, because my belief it isn't sand at all, there's something else in there." So they held the guy in custody overnight while they analysed the sand, and guess what? It was sand. So they put the sand back into new bags and sent him on his way. 2 days later, peddling in from Mexico, there he was again. Again, the bags on the back. So again, he insisted it was just sand. So again, they took it away to the chemistry lab and analysed it, and it was sand. And the thing continued 2 or 3 times a week. This guy turned up with the bags on his back, and he said it's sand, and it was sand. And it went on for about 6 months, and it was doing the border guard's head in. And then it stopped. All of a sudden it stopped. And about a month after the last appearance, the border guard was down having a bit of R&R in Tijuana, and he was in a cantina, and who did he see sitting having a beer but this guy? So he went over to him and said, "You've got to tell me. You've got to tell me, what were you smuggling into the States?" The guy just looked at him. And he said, "I don't do that no more." He said, "You know, I've made enough money, so I don't work anymore." And the guard said, "You've got to tell me. You've got to tell me. I know you were making money taking something into the United States. What was it?" The guy looked at him and said, "Bikes."